And thank you all for being here and out there, wherever that is. I'm very happy to be here. I'm happy to get a chance to talk about Into the Mirror. My wife likes to tease me every time someone asks me what your book is about, and I try to explain it to them. And she says afterwards, "You don't know how to explain what this book is about. You've been working on it for 5 years, and why can't you explain it?" So I'm going to make another attempt today, and maybe I'll manage. I don't know. The shortest explanation I could give is that this book is about Mahayana Buddhism and modernity. So maybe I should say a few words about modernity to start with. We're all immersed in modernity, so it's very hard for us to see. We're like fish in water. Fish don't have a lot to say about water, I'm sure, because it's their natural dwelling place, and modernity is our natural dwelling place. But I thought I'd give two very brief examples, highlights of what I think are modernity. The first is a little story about one of the major achievements of humanity. In the last 100 years, we have managed to extend human lifespan double. People now live, on the average, everywhere in the world, about twice as long as they lived 100 years ago. That's pretty extraordinary. The reasons for that are the discovery of antibiotics, the discovery of vaccines, and the pasteurization of milk, or germ theory more generally. These three discoveries, along with tremendous efforts by public health, have doubled the human lifespan. People used to live an average of 40 years, and now the average is around 80 years. So that's amazing. Another little vignette about modernity. A couple of years ago, a UN report on the environment came out that said that currently 1 million species of plants and animals are at risk of becoming extinct in the near future. That's also a pretty incredible achievement. Not such a good one. And that's because of human impact on the environment. So on the one hand, we have this incredible brilliance, intelligence, creativity that has doubled the human lifespan. And on the other hand, we have this incredible stupidity that is causing us to destroy the planet that we live on, the environment that we live in. So how do we make sense of that? As Buddhists, how do we make sense of that? That's a big question. We could be so clever and so stupid. Reflecting on this makes me think of one of the very core teachings of Buddhism that appears again and again, which is known as the two truths or the two realities. In Sanskrit, and I have to be really careful because we have a Sanskritist in our presence who's going to correct me, but the two truths are known as Samvriti Satya and Paramata Satya. Close enough? Okay. So Paramata Satya is often translated as ultimate truth or ultimate reality or genuine reality. Samvriti Satya is more like apparent reality or conventional reality, and it's often translated as relative reality, but it has this other sense of concealment. So it's a truth that reveals and at the same time conceals, which is very interesting. How can truth both reveal and conceal? What Samvriti Satya, or the relative truth, conventional truth, reveals is how appearances work, how one thing seems to produce another thing. One thing leads to another thing. What it conceals is the nature of things, how things actually are, what's called the ultimate truth or genuine reality. So we have this sense of intellect, for example. Intellect reveals and at the same time conceals. So our science and our technology have revealed ways of dealing with phenomena very powerfully, very sophisticatedly, so that we can create all these medicines, we can create this public health, we can create iPhones, what have you. It's amazing, but yet it's concealing something. And what it conceals basically is the causes of happiness and sorrow, and the causes of liberation and bondage. These are the things that Buddhism is really interested in. Buddhism is all about creating the causes of happiness, getting rid of the causes of suffering, and helping us find freedom, liberation. That's the whole point of Buddhism. We are in modernity stuck in this difficult place because all of the accomplishments of science and technology and modernity altogether, wonderful as they are, conceal what is most important, to the point where this seemingly very obvious thing called the mind or consciousness is often regarded as something either unimportant, not functional, or non-existent even. There are materialists, there are philosophers and scientists. In fact, the majority of scientists and philosophers are materialists. They believe that mind or consciousness comes out of the brain, it's a product of the brain, or that it's what's called an epiphenomena, something that doesn't really exist. Sometimes they even say it's an illusion, that mind is an illusion, which is interesting when you think about it for 2 seconds. If it's an illusion, who's experiencing an illusion? Who's being deluded? So this side of modernity, this materialist side of modernity, has produced this extraordinarily confused understanding of what the causes of happiness are and what the causes of sorrow are. So consumerism, the belief that possessing things might make you happy. Possessing any kind of thing, whether it's material, psychological, spiritual, whatever it is that you think you might possess, cannot be a source of enduring happiness, cannot liberate you from the feeling of poverty, anxiety, inadequacy. So we have lots of answers to this as Buddhists. We can talk about the Four Noble Truths. We can talk about all sorts of things. But we have a problem, I think, which is that we are so conditioned by the materialist assumptions, the basic materialist assumptions that are so prevalent in our world, that it's really hard to believe in the truth of the Mahayana. We often think about something in our brain. We think these things that are all around us that Buddhism says are empty, they can't be empty because they're made of particles. And they're forces that come as waves. There are all these quantum mechanics. There are molecules. All of these models of reality, conceptual models of reality, seem to us to be genuinely real. They must be real because the scientists can send rockets to the moon. They can make televisions. They can create the internet. So they must know what they're talking about. And yes, in the relative reality, they can create the causes and conditions that allow my image to appear on a computer in New York City. And that's amazing. That's fantastic. But believing that it's more than appearance is problematic. So we have this interesting challenge of trying to get beyond conventional reality in an environment, a culture where the conventional reality has become so powerful and so deeply accepted and ingrained and assumed that we think that's all there is. And the mind, which seems to be pretty important for all the teachings of Buddhism, seems to be relegated to a second-class citizenship. So the reason that I wrote this kind of kooky book is that I wanted to talk about Mahayana Buddhism in a way that was relevant in this culture, in this time, and that used some of the Western methodologies for counteracting or contradicting these materialist assumptions that we carry with us. So I don't know what our time's like. I think we have some time. I hope this won't bore you, but I'll tell you a little bit about some of the arguments that appear in this book that are aimed at the materialist assumptions that many of us have. So the first one is what's called the explanatory gap, the gap in explanation. There is no broadly accepted explanation how mind could arise from matter. All of the neuroscience, all of the physics, all of the biology addresses what is assumed to be a material basis for mind. But there is no theory that has held any strong acceptance about how this could be. It's assumed that the brain produces the mind, but we experience the mind. When we have experience, when we are aware of mind, we don't experience brain. We can experience someone else's brain if we cut open their skull, or if we use an MRI or something like that. We can make images that must be a brain. But we can't make any connection between those images, those experiences, and the experience of consciousness, mind. So that's called the explanatory gap. No satisfactory explanation from the side of science about how mind could arise from matter. The second argument that is, I think, very powerful is known as the knowledge argument. And this goes back to a paper that I think was written in the 1980s by an Australian, Frank Jackson. And this is a thought experiment. Imagine a neuroscientist, an extremely brilliant and talented neuroscientist. Jackson calls this person Mary. And in the original argument, Mary was raised in a completely black and white environment, but later the argument was refined to remove a couple of obstacles with that presentation. So Mary is colorblind. She knows all the facts about biology, neuroscience, chemistry, physics. She knows all the facts about the visual system, how information is processed on the retina, through the ganglia, in the frontal cortex, I think, or the visual cortex. She understands all the pathways. She understands everything that science knows about vision. And think of this as happening 100 years from now, where our knowledge of vision is even better than it is today. At some point, Mary has an operation that they have developed in this future time that cures her colorblindness. And for the first time, she sees an apple and sees what red looks like. So up till then, she knew all the scientific facts about the color red. but she had never had the experience. The argument is having all the information, all the facts, all the science about color, there is still something more to be known. That is the experience of color, what color is like to the mind. So that's the second major argument. The third one is perhaps the funniest. It's called the conceivability argument. And a man named David Chalmers, who's another Australian philosopher, who's quite an extraordinary thinker, who is the first one who articulated what's known as the hard problem of consciousness. I think most of us have probably heard of the easy problems are the ones that can be solved by our normal scientific, third-person scientific method. The hard problem is, why is there consciousness at all? So Chalmers poses this argument that is called the conceivability argument. You can conceive of a being that is identical to a human being down to the atomic level. Every molecule, every atom, every particle is identical, but without consciousness. This is called a philosophical zombie. So you can conceive that there could be zombies. Probably, the laws of nature don't make it possible for real philosophical zombies to exist. But as a thought experiment, you can imagine that everything is identical physically, and all is dark inside. This is another argument that consciousness is not a physical property. Consciousness is a fundamental property of nature. So one way of describing that is, and I think Chalmers uses this expression, he said, if God created these zombies, she would still have more work to do to give them consciousness. She could create identical beings to humans, but still need to do more to give them consciousness. So these are the kinds of arguments that contemporary philosophers use to argue that mind has to be reckoned with. I think these are important for Buddhist practitioners to understand, because the current culture was not around at the time the Mahayana was developed. The arguments we have learned from the tradition probably don't hit home with contemporary scientists, contemporary philosophers. So it's good to have some arguments in our favor to compete against these materialistic views which deny the importance of mind. Because if people don't believe that mind is a thing even, or that it's just this random product of the brain, how are they going to understand the truth of suffering, the truth of cessation, the truth of the path? So I've written about that a bit, and that's sort of the foundational material in the book before introducing a historical presentation of the way the Mahayana developed in India, which, as much as we can tell, which is very little, we have very little historical evidence about how it developed. But my understanding of the way it developed seems to mirror how we, as people who might practice the Mahayana path, would experience our own progression along that path. So that's a less than brief summary of Into the Mirror. We have time for some discussion if anyone has any comments or questions.
Probably that's my part then. Any questions? In the room? Or online, possibly? I think you should then use this raise your hand option and... Go ahead. Okay, sure, go ahead then first.
Thank you for this talk. I was a fan of your book, Contemplating Reality.
Thank you.
I'm excited for this one. I was wondering about one of the arguments that you mentioned and a further argument, and I was wondering if you'd talked about this one. So the first question is something I've always wondered about this explanatory gap argument, which also ties in with, I think, Chalmers' account of the hard problem. In other words, how do you go from kind of a materialist account to a phenomenological account, or basically from where does the experience element arise sort of out of the physical element, because you could document, of course, so much of the brain activity as you were discussing. So anyway, there's some kind of causal lacuna there, but
I love the word lacuna.
but me too. It seems like that causal lacuna is actually there in every scientific theory. It's funny, in Thomas Doctor's class, we're talking about the Mula Majamaka Karika and the Nagarjuna's arguments about causality, and how basically, not from self, not from other, not from both, not from neither does anything arise. So there's actually no way to get the kind of answer to the hard problem, or to fill that explanatory gap. Like, there's sort of no logical way there. In any scientific argument, you're going to find that if you go deep enough, right? You're only going to get to a level of correlation, right? What science gives us is a bunch of correlations. Like, we know when this thing appears in the brain, kind of people feel this way, right? And that's like the best.
They report feeling that way.
Yeah, they report feeling that way. Exactly. And that's kind of true in a lot of ways. Certain chemical reactions occur, and then other chemical reactions follow. So it's like we have these correlations. So I guess part of what I'm wondering is, if we developed a model of the brain sophisticated enough to have correlations that were much more predictively powerful, do you think that would satisfy kind of scientists and yourself? It probably wouldn't get you to a strictly materialist standpoint, but I'm wondering, like, where you think the potential kind of is there from a scientific standpoint.
That's a really interesting question. I think the kicker is that we can never get beyond experience. We can never get beyond mind to establish anything extramental. The assumption that we are talking about matter in the first place, that gives us this duality of mind and matter, doesn't stand up. So we might get extremely good at these correlations, and we might be able to produce really good effects because of that, helping people with schizophrenia or something. Who knows? Could be great. But fundamentally, we're never going to be able to step outside of mind, outside of experience, to land on something material. And as those first two little narratives about modernity, I think, make clear, our ingenuity in developing the techniques and the conceptual models that would be involved in that could be fantastic. How it's put to use could be helping cure mental disease or finding ways to world domination through, it's a crapshoot. My interest in the science and the philosophy goes only so far, really up to the point where we can talk seriously about the mind, and then we really need to talk about liberation and bondage, because that's really what's going to be valuable to people. And that's not going to be on that continuum of help and harm. That's takes us to the other side. So that,
Yeah, that's super helpful, and I totally agree. And what you said actually brings me to like the second question that I had. Your argument that basically you can never get outside the mind to establish something extramental. I think that's like a really strong argument to make. And in fact, it's the opposite argument that scientists tend to make, which is that, so they say mind comes out of the brain. And then this argument basically says, no, brain actually comes out of the mind.
Yeah.
Like brain is a mental construct, which feels totally correct to me. So my question is, one, do you cover that kind of part of the argument in your book? And two, something that I've discovered when talking about this with Westerners is that argument often leads to, oh, so that's just solipsism. Like, how do you get outside of your own brain?
sure.
And so without recourse to an argument for emptiness, like, because if you go to emptiness, it's somewhat easier. It's like, there's no you to be alone in the world, right? But if you don't have that.
No, you've got to go there. And, as Tomas started this course on the Madhyamaka Karika, talking about individual selflessness. And I thought that was great because, often we'll get into Madhyamaka and think about the emptiness of out there without realizing it's personal. So, yeah, you're right. If we don't talk about personal selflessness and emptiness, we don't get anywhere. Great, thank you.
Let's pass it on.
Yeah, thank you for this talk. And when you were talking about modernity, I was thinking about how our modern life, it's so fast, the pace is so fast that probably we see impermanence better than in past. And technology, this kind of technology, when people can see your image everywhere, it also shows some kind of illusion, like in dramatic reality. And so I was thinking maybe some aspects are more revealing nowadays because of modern life or changes.
Yeah.
So what do you think about it?
Yeah, that's great. It's true. Kempo Sotram Gyamtso Rinpoche often said that the modern world was the perfect place to practice the samadhi of illusion. And he recommended to his students that we go to department stores, which don't exist anymore because of impermanence, and Amazon, because they have lots of mirrors in them, and just walk through department stores. I guess we can still go through shopping malls and things, but places where there are lots of reflections And if you don't try to buy things, but you just walk through them and look at the illusory nature, and you look at the experience of, oh, there's someone on a television screen. There's someone who's real, and then see what's the difference. All form and emptiness. So yeah, the modern life has many possibilities of encouraging us to find the Dharma. The biggest one, I think, is one with all this materialism being so unsuccessful at making us happy. The truth of suffering is being presented. The amount of anxiety people have today, particularly young people, is phenomenal. The number of suicides, drug addictions, there are so many causes and conditions that I think will help people find the Dharma, hopefully. So, yeah, the modernity is extremely problematic, and at the same time, there's a lot of potential. But the way I've approached this book is that there's a particular obstacle that practitioners have, which is the sense of a solidified world that we get from the scientific models of reality, and how to at least cut that a little so we have a little gap.
Just go ahead. It doesn't look like anybody's raising their hand.
The more I'm kind of in this Buddhist game, I just see this amazing, I call it's like a clearinghouse of ideas, especially, I mean, I'm a Westerner and I'm studying Buddhist with Western teachers and a kind of Western paradigm, and occasionally, yes, with, Eastern teachers. But something that has been definitely a hallmark of Western Buddhism is this sort of cross-disciplinary dialogue that's going on. So we have so many, as modernity has increased, we have all these increased specializations. And, materialism, definitely, we know medicine and technology, and all the sciences, highly, highly specialized with their own materialistic paradigm. We know we have psychology, highly, specialized also, their own paradigms. And then we have, what we would call in the West, in Western philosophy, soteriology. This another paradigm where there is a religious path towards some sort of transcendence, whether it's, a Judeo-Christian salvation or liberation. And these different paradigms don't really talk to each other. The religious people do the religious stuff, the psychologists do their thing, the mental world, mental suffering is relegated to its own world, and then material problems, again, all separated. And you named it, materialism of our physical world, psychological materialism, spiritual materialism. So there obviously is a role, I think, for modern Buddhists to be that big tent where all these dialogues can happen with all these different paradigms, the soteriological paradigm, psychological paradigm, the physical paradigm. But I'm wondering where the gap is. Are we not communicating to all these different paradigms well enough for them to understand, or are we needing to, someone such as yourself, learn enough of the language? And we know there's amazing Buddhist scholars out there who can speak to these different disciplines. Do we just need to become more multilingual, I guess, multidisciplinary in our communication to start to make this big tent bigger, I guess?
There's this is a reference that anyone under 60 probably won't get, but that's the $64,000 question. That partially it's a matter of branding, that Buddhism's brand is religious. But I think that's not the biggest part. I think we need to become more sophisticated in, as you say, learning the language of these disciplines, learning to communicate with people with very different views of reality. And also, it's this is hard stuff. Most people are not interested in philosophy. Most people are not going to want to have a dialogue on Madhyamaka, let alone Yogacara. So I think, I don't know. I don't know that there's an obvious path forward other than for us to do what we do as well as we can with the least amount of insider jargon, and learning a lot about how other people think so that hopefully we can communicate. I don't have any great answers to that, but it is absolutely an essential question.
Anybody else? Somebody likes to say something. Maybe I can ask you a question then myself, if you want. Oh, okay, very good. So then please go ahead, whoever that is. Diane?
Just wanted to kind of surf on this last comment, because it seems that RYI in some way is trying to do that by bringing academic with the traditional to talk to each other, or at least create a place where we can learn both ways. So there is a little bit of scientific approach through academic, even through Buddhist studies, for example, philology and phenomenology, and we bring all these things. So it proves that it's an important skill to develop at this point. These different languages, but also conversation, intersection of different discipline coming together to speak. I think this is a very potent area where RYI could actually participate, but also your book, Into the Mirror, does actually participate in opening up the dialogue. It's kind of an inner dialogue, because we have these beliefs. It's really looking into the mirror in a very kind of value sense or belief sense. So looking into the mirror of our own belief and then seeing where the thing doesn't hold any analysis, like we would do when we do Madhyamaka analysis. So yes, I think really this is a good way to know. We need to keep going in that direction for myself anyway.
Thank you, Diane, and hi.
Hello, so happy to see you.
So it just occurred to me that the fact that we could have this conversation today, and that you people in here and presumably out there are interested in understanding the Dharma enough to be able to talk about these things, this wouldn't have happened 25 years ago. So we've already made a lot of progress thanks to. Thank you, Rinpoche. I'm talking about my book, which is it's called Into the Mirror. Into the Mirror. No. Yeah.
You never see your face without mirror.
That's true. So to me, that we can have an intelligent discussion of these things today is a sign of tremendous progress. And RYI has been one of the main players in this. I think, you know,
One more. Without kit introduction, without kit introduction teaching, you never ever realize highest realization. Got it?
Yes, got it. Thank you.
there you go.
Kind of a joke that this was a good introduction.
Yeah. Did you want to say something? I guess that stopped everyone's minds, so.
Yeah, I wanted to react to what you were just saying. I think by far and large is bias is the answer to that. And I think this is because people never overcome what they call the dualism that comes from Kant, basically, even though he didn't really mean it like that, obviously, but still, this is something people have to overcome. And I think it's also what I wanted to ask you is related to that. And what do you think about determinism in that sense? Because to me, modernism and particularly mechanistic worldviews, in some sense seem to be very deterministic. Yeah. So if I have the idea that consciousness is produced by the brain, it seems like that it's an automatic, let's say, causal effect of, let's say, things that we cannot control, right? I mean, and that would qualify as a deterministic worldview. And yet, the funny thing is, that means we are all compelled to think what we think. So then why bothering trying to convince anybody of our worldview? It does not make any sense, right? So I was wondering if you also addressed that in some way, because that's actually not very modern,
Yeah.
This is actually quite the opposite. Yeah. I found this one of these funny contradictions about modern philosophy, that they are actually quite, yeah, well, I don't say what I think it is.
Determinism. Well, as Buddhists, we conventionally believe in cause and condition and effect, but we also have that little twist of recognizing that cause, condition, and effect have no nature, and so there's possibility of real freedom. Freedom for whom? Well, sorry, there's no one who will have that freedom. Is that?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
I was just thinking about it in terms of that. I've felt that many scientists, they really propose this kind of models, and I had this feeling that they're basically so self-informed that they forgot that it's a theory, right? I mean, it's a theory, and it seems when you just long enough repeat your theory, it becomes something like approximating some truth, even though that is, of course, like total nonsense, right?
I think that's really accurate. And I think, there are people like Daniel Dennett who believes that mind is an illusion. And he's apparently extremely smart, very decent, good human being, but has this model that he is obsessed with and can't see around. He can't see that this is just something appearing in his mind. So, yeah. Well said, Julian. So I think unless there's,
Yeah, I'm kind of surfing again on your comment there. I wonder if you would say that Yogacara school is necessary, like almost essential to make that bring this understanding. I think from a Buddhist point of view, obviously not from everywhere, but
You know, I don't think I would say that any school is essential because, these are all methods. And what are the methods about? They're about revealing something to us. So what's essential is the revelation. And as Rinpoche just said, the pointing out is the method for revealing the deepest reality. So you don't need to know Madhyamaka to have pointing out. For us, I think as modern people, Madhyamaka, Yogacara, Svatantrika, Sutrantika, Pramana, all of these are really helpful, even if we've had pointing out from a great Lama, because we get the pointing out, we get a glimpse, and then we fall back into our conventional way of thinking. So we need methods to deconstruct the conventional thinking that blinds us to what has been pointed out. But yeah, I personally find the Yogacara teachings, which I don't know a lot about, but what I've studied a bit, are extremely helpful. And the Madhyamaka teachings are extremely helpful. Khenpo Rinpoche talked about one shows what genuine reality is not, and the other shows what genuine reality is. So they're complementary in that sense. But no particular teaching is essential. Finding ways to help people look at their own experience in a fresh way, overcome their habitual patterns of thinking about reality. That's what's essential. So another little thought in that direction. Khyentse Rinpoche, Dzongkar Khyentse Rinpoche, said in one piece a while back that when you're training with a guru, the important thing is just follow their instructions. If they tell you to drink a cup of tea every hour on the hour, drink the tea. So there are a lot of different ways of training. The philosophical schools, I think, are super helpful and super important, especially for well-educated Westerners. Modern people have a lot of concepts to deconstruct. So that's very helpful. But there are a lot of ways of training.
thank you. Thank you.
We good?
I hope so. Um, if there is not any last comment from somewhere, I don't know, there is this relevant in the chat function there, Olaf? Okay, fair enough. So not. I suppose then there is nothing left to do besides thanking you, first and foremost, as well as everybody else, of course, for participating.
Well, thank you for having me here, inviting me, listening to me blab about something that I can't explain very well anyhow. And I think what did occur to me during the talk, which I think is my big takeaway, is that we can have this conversation today, that there are people who are interested in the Dharma and to such a degree that and with such intelligence that these topics are not like cuckoo land. So thank you very much. Thank you for everything you've brought to this discussion. I'm sure that you've put a lot of effort into whatever brought you here. So thank you very much.